am 94 years old and I have been a nurse for 43 years. And I am going to tell you 3 habits that kept me out of a nursing home after a fall that the hospital social worker told me, very kindly, very firmly, was probably the beginning of the end of my independent living. She was wrong. And I want to tell you exactly why she was wrong, and exactly what I did instead, and exactly why these 3 habits are available to almost every person watching this right now. Not just the young ones, not just the healthy ones, not just the ones with money or resources or a perfect support system. Every person, including you. I delivered over 400 babies in homes across 3 counties in rural Alabama. I nursed people through influenza and heart failure and grief so heavy it looked like a physical illness, because sometimes it is. I buried my husband Roosevelt in 1997 after 48 years of marriage. I buried my daughter Cecilia in 2006. She was 54 years old and she left a hole in this family that has never fully closed and never will. I lost my best friend Alberta. I lost my brother James Earl. I have had, in other words, sufficient reason to give up. I have had the kind of losses that entitle a person to stop fighting. I did not stop fighting. And in the fall of 2020, when I went down on my back porch at 5:30 in the morning reaching for my gardening gloves, and I lay there on that porch for 22 minutes before my neighbor Ida Mae heard me call, I did not stop fighting then either. They wanted to send me to a facility. I said no, and here is what I said yes to instead. Now, I want to tell you who I am before you decide this doesn't apply to you. I am not exceptional. That is the first thing. I grew up in Selma, Alabama, the 4th of 7 children, in a house where my mother cooked everything we ate and my father fixed everything that broke. And we did not go to the doctor unless the alternative was going to the grave, because the alternative was all we could afford. I became a nurse because Mrs. Opal Jennings, the county midwife who delivered me, came to our school when I was 12 years old and spoke to us about what a woman could do with her hands and her knowledge. And I decided on the spot that whatever she did, I was going to do. I started nursing in 1952. I worked in hospitals, and I worked in homes, and I worked in the back seats of cars when there was no other option. And in 43 years of doing it, I learned one thing above all others that medical school does not teach, and that most patients never figure out. The body has an enormous amount of interest in surviving, more than most people give it credit for, more than most doctors talk about. And the habits that support that interest are simpler, cheaper, and more available than anything in a prescription bottle. I have been practicing 3 of those habits my entire adult life. 3 specific habits that I believe, with the conviction of someone who has watched people age in every possible direction, made the difference between where I am sitting right now and where that hospital social worker thought I was going to end up. The moment that crystallized this for me was not the fall in 2020. It was a Monday morning in March of 1987. I was 57 years old, and I was making my rounds, and I visited 2 women on the same day who were both 79 years old, both widowed, both living alone in rural Alabama. One of them was in her garden when I arrived, dirt on her hands, telling me about the tomatoes she was putting in. The other one was in a recliner she had not gotten out of, based on the evidence, for most of the previous week. Same age, same circumstances, almost opposite conditions. And the difference between them was not luck. It was not genetics. It was habit. Specifically, it was the habits I am about to describe. I have been thinking about those two women for 37 years, and I want to tell you what I concluded. Here is the paradox I need you to sit with before we go any further, because without understanding it, the three habits are just advice, and advice without understanding is something people nod at and forget. We have been told by medicine, by culture, by the general understanding of what aging means, that physical decline after a certain age is primarily something that happens to you, that the body weakens on a schedule and your job is to manage the decline gracefully, take the medications, reduce the expectations, and eventually arrive at a place where other people take care of you because that is the natural order of things. And here is what 43 years of nursing and 94 years of living have taught me about that story. It is partially true and mostly wrong. It is true that the body changes. It is true that things get harder. It is true that there is no habit in the world that makes a person immortal. And I am not standing here telling you otherwise. But the story leaves out something enormous. It leaves out the degree to which the body responds, actively, measurably at almost any age, to being used, to being moved, to being fed real things, to being given reasons to continue. The story of inevitable decline treats the body like a clock that is running down on a fixed schedule. And the body is not a clock. It is more like a garden. It responds to attention. It responds to the right conditions. And most people, somewhere between 60 and 75, stop providing those conditions, not because they have to, but because nobody told them they didn't have to. The nursing home is not the destination of aging. It is the destination of certain habits of aging, and the habits can be changed. Not always, not in every situation, not as a guarantee. I want to be honest about that, but more often than the system that profits from those nursing home beds would like you to know. 3 habits. That is all I am talking about. 3 habits that I have practiced every day of my adult life, that I kept practicing after my fall in 2020, and that I am still practicing right now at 94 years old in my own house in Selma, Alabama, with my own garden and my own kitchen and my own particular creak in the second floorboard from the top of the stairs that I know like I know my own name. Let me tell you what they are. The first habit is movement every single day, without exception, without waiting to feel like it. And child, please, before you tell me you already know about exercise, let me tell you what I actually mean, because what I mean is different from what most people think I mean. I do not mean a gym. I have never been to a gym in 94 years, and I do not intend to start. I do not mean a fitness program or a YouTube workout or a standing desk. I mean that every day, regardless of what your body is telling you about whether it wants to, you make it move in ways that remind it what it is built to do. My habit since I was in my 30s has been this. I walk outside every morning before I do anything else. Not far, not fast, just outside in the air, moving. When I was younger, it was a mile or 2. Now it is to the end of the block and back. After my fall in 2020, for the first 3 weeks of recovery, it was from my bed to the kitchen window and back twice, holding the wall. I counted it. It counted. My husband Roosevelt used to say I was going outside to argue with the morning, and he was not entirely wrong. There is something that happens in my body and in my mind when I step outside and move through air that is not the air inside my house, and it has been happening for 60 years, and I have come to depend on it the way I depend on water, not as a preference, as a requirement. After my fall, when the pain was real and the fear of falling again was also real, because I will tell you honestly, the fear after a fall is its own kind of obstacle, and it is not nothing. I had to make a decision about whether that fear was going to determine how I lived. I decided it was not. I decided with full knowledge of the risk and with the understanding that a person can live cautiously or she can live, but she cannot fully do both. And I have been a nurse long enough to know which one I prefer. I started walking again on day 22 of my recovery. Short, careful. With a cane I resented and used anyway. By week 8, I was at the end of the block. By week 12, I was at the corner and back. The body responded. It always does if you give it something to respond to. You do not need to walk fast. You do not need to walk far. You need to walk today and tomorrow and the day after that, and not stop when it is uncomfortable, because it is going to be uncomfortable. And the discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that something is happening. Good things that are rebuilding you are often uncomfortable. That is how you know they are real. The second habit is cooking my own food and eating at a table. I know that sounds simple. It is not simple. It is, for people who are aging alone, one of the first things that goes, and when it goes, something fundamental goes with it. Something about the relationship between a person and their own body that is harder to name than it is to feel the absence of. I have cooked my own food my entire life, not fancy food, good food, food I grew some of myself, food I bought from people I knew, food I prepared with my own hands and ate sitting down at a table that had a place set at it even when I was the only one eating there. That last part matters. Roosevelt died in 1997, and I have been eating alone for 27 years, and I have set the table every single day for 27 years. Every day. Plate, fork, knife, napkin, glass of water, the whole thing. Because the ritual of the table is not about the company. The ritual of the table is about telling your body, this meal matters. You matter. The eating of this food is an event worth treating like one. After my fall, when I came home from the hospital with instructions about what I could and could not do, one of the things they told me was that I should keep things simple in the kitchen. Limited standing, limited time on my feet. I understood the medical logic of that. I also understood from 43 years of watching people age that the moment an older person stops cooking is often the beginning of a decline that the not cooking did not cause, but that the not cooking allowed. Because cooking requires engagement. It requires planning and sequencing and smell and touch and the particular satisfaction of having made something out of separate things. It keeps the brain in conversation with the body. It keeps the day structured around something purposeful. I kept cooking. I adapted. I got a stool for the kitchen counter so I could sit while I chopped. I made simpler things that required less standing. I took longer. I sat down when I needed to, but I cooked and I ate at the table and I set the place setting. And my body knew every single day that someone in this house considered it worth feeding properly. You are what you decide is worth the the effort of preparing. Cook for yourself like you mean it. Eat sitting down like the meal is an occasion, because it is. Every one of them is. The third habit is the one that surprised me most when I finally examined it, because it sounds the least like medicine and is, I believe, the most medicinal of the three. The third habit is purpose, specifically having something outside of yourself that requires your continued presence in order to happen. I am talking about something concrete. Not a vague sense of meaning, not a general feeling of mattering, a specific, weekly, regular commitment to something or someone that would be noticeably worse off if you were not there. For most of my adult life, that thing was my nursing work. When I retired in 1995, I had to find another version of it. And I want to be honest that the finding was not immediate or easy. The first year of retirement, I felt what I can only describe as a loosening, a sense that the things organizing my days had been removed and the days were softer and more shapeless than I knew what to do with. That softness, I came to understand, was dangerous, not comfortable dangerous. Genuinely dangerous, the way certain comfortable things are. I found my version of purpose in two places. The first was my church, where I became the person who called the elderly members who had not been seen recently, not to socialize, to check in the way I had checked in on patients for 43 years. I made those calls on Tuesday and Thursday mornings from a list I kept myself and updated myself. And there were weeks when those calls were the most useful thing I did. And I needed to be useful the way I needed to be outside walking every morning. The second place was my garden, not the gardening itself exactly. Although the gardening is good for all the reasons that movement is good, what I mean by the garden as purpose is that the garden is alive and it requires me. The tomatoes I planted in April need Hattie Mae Benson to water them in July, or they do not become tomatoes. That need, the garden's need for me, is not a small thing. It is a thread connecting me to the future. Every seed I plant is a promise to be here when it comes up. After my fall in 2020, the garden was what got me out to the porch and eventually into the yard and eventually back to myself faster than any physical therapy. Not because gardening is exercise, although it is, because the tomatoes needed me, because I had made a promise to those seeds and I was not raised to break promises. And the good Lord knows I was not going to start at 90. You need something that needs you, not your children, though your children need you, but something that needs you independently of whether your family is paying attention. A garden, a neighbor who expects your call, a class you teach, an animal in your care, something that has you written into its future. And that would be visibly worse off if you stopped showing up. That thing is not optional. It is the third leg of the stool. Without it, the movement and the food are sustaining a body that has been given no particular reason to stay sustained. With it, the body has direction. And a body with direction is a different thing altogether from a body that is simply continuing. I need to stop and talk to you directly for a minute, and I need you to actually hear this part. I know what some of you are doing right now. You are thinking, this is good advice, and it applies perfectly to my mother, my father, my aunt who has been declining since Uncle Harold passed. You are already composing the message you are going to send them about this video. Stop composing that message. I am not done talking to you yet. Because you are also aging. You may not feel like you are aging in a way that makes this conversation relevant, but you are. And the habits that keep a 94-year-old woman out of a nursing home do not begin at 94. They begin at 45, at 55, at the age you are right now, when the choices are still easy enough to make that you could make them today without it being a crisis. The woman in that recliner I visited in 1987 was not in that recliner because she was 79. She had been practicing the habits of the recliner for 20 years before I met her. The woman in her garden at 79 had been practicing those habits for the same 20 years. The difference between them was not age. The difference between them was accumulated daily choice. Right now, while you are sitting here, someone you love is making choices. Small, daily, unremarkable choices that are taking them toward one version of their future or the other. Your parent who has stopped cooking and started eating crackers and cheese in front of the television. Your friend who used to walk every morning and quietly stopped about 6 months ago and hasn't gone back. You yourself with the thing you used to do that gave you a reason to be somewhere at a certain time that you have been meaning to get back to. Those are not small things. They are the things, and they are changeable right now, today, with a walk to the end of the block and a meal cooked sitting on a stool and a phone call to someone who is expecting to hear from you. I'll tell you plainly where I am. I am 94 years old, and I will not live forever. And I am at peace with that the way you are at peace with the weather. You did not design it, you cannot change it. And there is something almost comfortable about accepting what you cannot change. What I am not at peace with is the idea of people sitting somewhere waiting to die when they could be living. I have watched too many people do that. I watched it professionally for 43 years, and I have watched it in my personal life since, and it is the thing that troubles me most about how we handle aging in this country. We treat the decline as the story. The decline is not the story. The story is everything you do before and during and in spite of the decline. The story is the tomatoes in July, the Tuesday phone calls, the walk to the end of the block and back. The people you love who are aging are not in their final chapter yet. Most of them are not. And the chapter they are in has more pages than they have been told it has, if the right habits are in place. The nursing home may come. I am not naive about that. But for most people, for most situations, it comes later than the system expects. And the difference between when it expects it and when it actually arrives, if you do the work, is measured in years, real years. Years of your own garden and your own kitchen and your own particular creak in your own floorboard. Those years are worth fighting for. I am 94 years old, and I am still fighting, and I intend to keep at it until the good Lord decides otherwise. So here is what I want you to do, not this weekend, today. Pick one of the 3 habits, just one, whichever one is the easiest place to start. Go outside and walk, even if it is only to the end of the driveway. Cook one real meal today and eat it sitting down at a table with a plate and a fork and a glass of water. Or make a list of one thing or one person that needs your continued presence in order to be okay, and make a commitment to that thing or that person today, out loud, where someone can hear it. Then, if there is someone in your life who has stopped doing these things, someone who has settled into the recliner and the crackers and the shapeless days, go see them. Not to lecture, not to send them a video. Just go see them and take a walk with them and eat a meal with them and ask them what used to give them a reason to be somewhere and listen to the answer. Sometimes all it takes is one person showing up and saying, "I came because I wanted to see you, and also because I think you need to take a walk with me," and then you walk. That is the whole thing. Move, cook, show up for something every day without waiting to feel like it. My grandmother used to say that the body is not your enemy. It is your oldest companion. Treat it accordingly. Take care of your body and it will take care of you. Stop and it stops. It's that simple and it is that serious.